Hi everyone, it's Plastic EP coming in from Australia. And let me tell you, I've got a very special guest. Clive Kelly has got a very big history with the Beatles, with Alan Williams, with Brian Epstein. And you're coming in from the UK, is that right, Clive?
Yeah, I'm coming in from next to Liverpool, Preston.
Fantastic. Now,
Yeah.
let's go back in the history, right?
Yeah.
I want to know what it was like. Tell everybody, because so many Beatle fans there. How did you tell me the first time that you met the Beatles and where it went from there? And you went to Germany with them.
I met them before they were together. I met when John Lennon and he met Paul McCartney the same day that I met them at a church hall in Woolston, Liverpool. I think the year would be 1957.
And John was on the truck and they met in the hall.
That's right. And I was outside with a crowd, yeah.
Were they amazing times or what?
Well, you know, the 50s were not as good as the 60s, and the 60s were not as good as the 70s, because the 60s was the time of the birth pill, when girls could have sex freely. You know, they were released to be free. And it was the time of the hippies. And I was classed as the king of the hippies in London, because I had a community and a house where I taught people how to live, make things, and sell them on the streets. And I had 8 different street stalls. Therefore, I was called a costermonger, or a street
That was in
trader.
Carnaby Street, yeah?
I was in Carnaby Street, Portobello Road, Kings Road, Regent Street, Oxford Circus, Shaftesbury Avenue, outside the everywhere around London, wherever. And in Hyde Park, when we had some rock and roll festivals, like the Rolling Stones Festival, I was there. And I gave out 50,000 handmade roach clips, which was a little fish pendant. When you squeeze the fish like that, its tail opened like that. You could put the last of your joint in your mouth. They were called roach clips, you know. So you could smoke your spliff down to the end.
I want to know what it was like with the Jacaranda and when the Beatles started rehearsing and what you thought and going to Germany with them.
All right, here goes. I was 17 years old. I was walking the streets of Liverpool. It was a very misty, cold night. And I was walking away from the ship called the Blue Funnel Line, and the name of the boat was the Theseus, the Greek god Theseus, when I heard through the mist a very strange sound of steel drums and a maraca and guitar. So I followed that sound, and I could only see a few yards in front of me because of the fog. And I followed the sound to a place in a side street. It was a little old wooden shop called, it was in Slater Street, and it was all boarded up at the front. And I looked down at the grid, and that's where the sound was coming up through the pavement. So I knocked on the door. It was wooden front with a steel door. So I knocked on the steel door, and a guy opened the door, and he said, "What do you want, lad?" And I said, "Well, I like the music. Can I come in and listen?" And he said to me, "No, you've got to be a student or a nurse." Well, I said, "I'm a student." He says, "All right, well, you're a student of." Now, this was Tommy Hartley, who was the best bouncer in Liverpool. So he turned around and called, "Alan, there's a guy here called Clive Kelly. Wants to come in." He says he plays steel drum. So Alan came to the door. He said, "Oh, if you're so bloody good, stay on the door with Tommy and let's see how good of a hard case you are." So I stayed on the Jacaranda door from there on, being a doorman bouncer. That's how it started. And then the Beatles came and asked Mr. Williams, that was my partner, Alan, he became my partner in business, the owner of the Jacaranda, Alan Williams, the first Beatles manager, invited me to be his partner. He said, "If you can find another cavern club in another city nearby, I'll be your partner." Now, that's a whole story which I'd love to tell, and I'd love to tell it to you. If I may, I've got the time, have I, to tell that story?
Of course you have. It's a fascinating story.
All right, here it comes. Every day, I would get up in the morning at 5 o'clock. I was sleeping on the sofa of one room flat with Alan Williams in the double bed over there, and I was in the sofa here. And Alan would shout, "Time to get up, Clive," because we'd been smoking doobies or, and drinking whiskey and Bacardi and Coke it was in those days. And I'd catch the milk train, first of all to Lancaster, where the prison is, Lancaster Castle, where I was resident for 2.5 years. And I'll tell you more about that later. And then when I found out that Lancaster wouldn't allow rock and roll music into the city because it was the city of the Duchy of Lancaster and the Queen's best friend who visits her once a year and stays with her. By the way, I went to her house last week. I put the photographs on Facebook. We went to the Duchy of Lancaster's house to talk to her about BBC Radio Lancashire not allowing me to talk on their microphones, even though I've made films and sold them to the BBC, and I am part of the BBC Original Club. And I made films for the BBC without government permission of Brazil, illegally, for the BBC in 1972. At the same time I made that film, we made an illegal film because I smuggled in parts and pieces of 35mm cameras, because Bob Saunders and Tony Isaacs, said to me, "Let's make a Tarzan film in the Amazon. You're a good fighter, you're a strong lad, you're good looking. Let's make a film about Tarzan in the Amazon called Clive Kelly." So at the same time, we were making a film with legal permission from BBC and the government of Brazil. I had a second camera hidden in the bushes, which was 35mm with wide angle Panavision lens, and I was shooting a film for cinema then, and that film was Rowney and Clive Kelly, was nominated for the Oscar. And there's a lot of story about that because the film has been stolen from me. My name's been taken off it. There's a whole story about that. Was when Arnold Schwarzenegger came to stay with me and Georgie Benson on board my trimaran at Cannes Film Festival in 1977. That film was nominated, and it won the Ecological Prize of the Year for the best achievement of filmmaking. Do you remember?
So we'll go back to the Beatles going to Germany. The first time you heard them play and you knowing them, getting to know them.
Right. So Alan Williams allowed them to rehearse in the basement during the day. Now, there was a lot of hard cases, in Liverpool. It was a very rough city. So Alan asked me, would you come and work on the door during the day as well to look after the Beatles, because they're nice lads, and I think I'm going to manage them. So I came during the day and stood on the door, and I stood on the grid, actually. The grid is in front on the pavement, right? And it's the grid that's the ventilation for the cellar. So as I stood there, the drum beat of Pete Best, not Ringo Starr, he was not the drummer. Anyway, the beat of Pete Best came up through my feet and became...
The Adam beat. The Adam beat.
Yeah, the Alan beat. Yeah, that's a good idea. So there they go, they're really rehearsing in the cellar, and everybody was coming up. And Beryl, who was Alan Williams' wife, he said that, she said, Beryl said to me, those Beatles, she said they're eating too much bread and butter and jam. She said, tell them if they want jam on the toast, it's an extra penny. Well, John Lennon didn't quite like that, so he told me off, John. I said, it's not my fault, mate, it's Beryl. Anyway, John and I got off really well together because we're both of Irish blood. Both of our families were slaves to the English, because England was took over our island, which is Northern Ireland. So me and John got on well. And every day when he took his break, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon from rehearsing, he'd come up and sit with me, and he'd just sit there as we were talking, the serviettes on the table, just without even saying anything. He'd just pick up a pencil or take one from me here. I always carried a... See, can you see that? That's from Fools and Horses, by the way. That's the scene of Fools and Horses, which was on last week, where they say he always carries one in his pocket to scratch his back. He should have told the truth and said that Clive always used one in his ear to scratch his back and pick his parrot up. 2 reasons for that. It's my parrot perch, my back scratcher, and I eat with a chopstick. Anyway, he'd sit down, John, and just while we were chatting, he'd pick up a pencil or take my pencil out my ear and start writing. And by the time he'd had a cup of tea and his bread and jam, it was actually toast with jam on it, he'd wrote a song. He'd say, Clive, throw a word at me. I said, mask. Ah, right. So Eleanor Rigby picked up the mask that she wore by the door. Was it for all those lonely people? And round. Do you know that John Lennon, by the way, gave me, and I still have it, the gold disc for Mind Games. Got it in a frame, because he was a friend of mine. Spiritually, we got on like brothers because we both have Irish accent. We both have the same background, Although John Lennon, my mate John, he went to art school and I didn't. I didn't go to school. I went to the forest at the age of 9 and took the rag and bone man's horse because he whipped it too much, and I threw him off the cart and took his horse. 9 years old, I became an ecologist, just like that, because by the lake where I took the horse in the park of Denton, Manchester, there was a beautiful lake with white swans, and the horse and I would swim. The horse would swim. And then one day, a big lorry came and tipped rubbish into the lake. And then another lorry and another lorry and another. And I sat there with the horse and I watched the swans slowly dying because they tipped poison and paint remover, killing nature around the lake. So that was my time of building the canoe from a loaner, which is a tarpaulin off the tip. Build a canoe out of birch branches, like a Canadian, river canoe, a canoe from Canada.
Yep.
And I built it, and then I kept it hidden from the police and everybody else in the drains of Manchester, the water drains, amongst the shit and everything. But I had to do that to hide it so that nobody would take it off me. When I'd finally got it finished, I decided to go and stop. The best way I knew was to go to Manchester, right? To go to the BBC television and tell them about the pollution. And so I built this canoe and canoed all the way to Manchester, all the way up the canals. That took me 3 days. And eventually I got picked up by a trawler. And that starts my sea life, which makes me into a captain, ship's photographer, first-class silver service steward, a telephonist on the telephone board. And the most important of all was I was the night polisher that would polish the floors at night while everybody slept. And the boat cruised across the Atlantic and then the Pacific.
Tell us about the time you went with the Beatles to Germany, Clive.
Alan was taking groups out to Germany because he had a theatrical agency. And he sent out Rory Storm and the Hurricanes. And he sent out King Size Taylor and the Dominoes and other groups like that, And he was working with this guy that I've just told you, Bruno Koschmider, who was the ex-boxer, fighter, and also he ran the entertainment in Frankfurt, and he owned all the clubs, including the Kaiser Keller and the Ratten Keller. Keller means cellar, the King's Cellar and the Rat Cellar and the Top Beat Club. And so Alan and I flew over to collect the commission because Alan had taken the Beatles over without me in a van, a Bedford van, and driven them over. And there's a picture of the Bedford van and everything on my Facebook page.
Yeah, that's famous of it going on the ship. Everyone knows that picture.
Right. Well, I've got that on my Facebook page. And Alan drove with Beryl, his wife, and there was, who was it, that guy there that used to be my friend, Freddie Starr. No, he used to play with Freddie Starr. Oh, what's his name now? He's a
I'm
dark.
saying Jerry and the Pacemakers went there too.
Oh, Jerry. Yeah. Well, yeah, they did. Yeah, they did. Yeah. Yeah. Quite a lot of groups did. You know, the Searchers, I think the Mersey Beats, the Jerry and the Pacemakers, quite a few. So when we got to Germany, we went to see the Beatles, and then I went to see Koschmider with Alan, because Alan was a little bit apprehensive about going to see this, well, what they considered to be a sort of underworld, like the Cray Twins in London, sort of, you could call them the underground movement. And so he wanted me with him to look after him, you know. So I bought it. I had an imitation pistol. You know, it was a child's pistol from the toy shop, which I wore just under my coat here in a shoulder holster. So it looked quite real, but it wasn't real. It was only a plaything, which I'd used on the streets of London when I was street trading to confront the Cray Twins, because the Cray Twins said they was going to tar and feather me on Hampstead Heath because I was working their manor or their patch. You know, in other words, I was selling, making money in their area, and they didn't like that, you know. Anyway, we went to see Bruno Koschmider and to get the commission, and we went into the office. We had a little drink, and we had coffee, actually, if I remember rightly. And Alan and him did the deal on the commission. And then we went to the club, the Rattenkeller, I think it was, or the Kaiserkeller. I can't remember which of the ones it was, but we went there, and Alan left me with King Size Taylor. He was a big band in those days, King Size Taylor and the Dominoes.
That's right.
Because King Size Taylor, like 6'3", you know, I was then 6.5, 6 foot and only half an inch. So it was King Size Taylor that was looking after me, you know. And so the stories of the Beatles, what would you like to know? Well, do you know the story where John was going to pee out the window? Maybe you can't talk about on the Nuns.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
we know about that. That's famous, that one. He's got the toilet seat around his neck when he's playing on the stage. I mean, you were there.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, what I liked about about Germany was the freedom, the freedom of the sex. That's true. We didn't have that in England. You know, we didn't have places where if you wanted sex, you would go to have it. And in the streets, you know, they'd have women wrestling naked in the mud. You
Yeah,
know,
red light
Alan.
district.
Yeah. When they were playing, you know, Bruno wouldn't let them off stage. You know, sometimes he'd be going 8, 9, 10 hours non-stop. And the German drunkard seamen screaming at the Max show, Max show. You know, that means make a show. Show us, do something different. And so that's how the Beatles developed. Half out of being afraid to stop, because that was the real reason. They couldn't stop and sit down and have a drink and get beaten to death. You know, the group like the Beatles were even more raucous than the other groups. You know, the Beatles were more loud. Well, not more loud. The biggest, loudest, of course, was the big three. But the Beatles were near enough as loud, you know. Pete Best's mother called Mona. And
Yes.
Mona was my mum's best friend, because my mum and Mona, they were in the 30s, you know. And they were the owners of clubs, because my mum, you know, I gave her the QB club. I had 7, 8 clubs altogether in England at that time, one in each city. I'll give you some names if you want. I've got the Cavern in Preston, the Bluesville in Wigan, which was an old Victorian cinema, the Ponderosa in Bolton, the Witch's Cauldron, that was a good one, in New Brighton. And then, of course, I had the Catacombs Cavern Club in Preston, which was 7 big arches. Barrett, talk in the camera, talk in the camera. No, go back up, ouch, ouch, ouch. He's always drop my earring, never mind. And Mona and my mum were good friends, the two ladies of rock and roll of Lancashire and Liverpool. Um, what else can I tell you? Well, Pete Best and his brother Roag Best are now making the Beatles Hotel out of the Casbah Club, which was in a very big house. They're spending millions on it, and we're hoping that it's going to be a great success. And we're hoping that we can get Liverpool back again to be the city of culture, as it was. I now live in Preston, which is half an hour's drive from Liverpool, but my family, my sister and her family, and my family still live in Liverpool. So we drive up and down there once or twice every month, to visit each other. So I'm still well in touch with Liverpool and the Liverpool scene. Okay. I went and built a boat, a 55-foot, never built before, a very unique one-off, 55-foot by 22-foot wide, 5 double cabins, a large saloon, 2 bathrooms, a studio and a workshop, and a glass floor that opened if you wanted to film in the water, or if the trimaran turned over in mid-ocean. I built it in such a way you could take the mast and drop it right down from the upside down boat, so you could continue sailing upside down. You can see photographs of that as well on my Facebook page. It was called Survival. Survival, because I helped start and finance Survival International myself, and who helped me a little bit in that was Spike Milligan and Michael Bentine, one of the Goons, very famous Goon show. They helped me raise cash, and Michael Bentine came and was the compere at the showing of my first film, Indians, at the International Contemporary Arts Cinema, which is facing Buckingham Palace in the Mall, London. Michael Bentine did that for me. Harry Seacombe, well, I put the television aerials up on his house, and because I was a television aerial rigger as well as filmmaker, street trader, costermonger, and one of the Fools and Horses original story maker. And now, in the meantime, I'll just show you this painting here. A very beautiful painting of, it's a beautiful painting of a Yanomami Indian. It's worth a lot of money, and it was given to my museum. You see, I had a museum to the Amazon Indians and Captain Clive Kelly. And I was also building just now a theme park with a hotel, a school, and a hospital dedicated to helping the Amazon Indians survive. And in that theme park, we were also going to have a zoo and a veterinary service where we could take the animals back off the streets where they've been stolen and sold and return them back to the areas of the Amazon where they came from. Because you can't just let them go, because each one would kill the other one. They've got to go back to the areas from where they came to survive. Okay? So I was building a theme park, and the plans were drawn up, and just the plans cost me 15 grand. And Wilson Reyes Neto, who helped the plans to build Brasilia, the capital city of Brazil. Jesse, what was the name of the architect? I've just forgotten. Nehemiah. That's right. Nehemiah was the architect that built the most modern city in the world. And his apprentice was the one that charged me 15 grand to make the plans for the Survival Ethno-Eco Museum of Captain Clive Kelly and the Amazon Indians. And in that, we had everything from what do you call those, going down from the mountaintop to canoes that would go down with people in. And I made 23 trimaran canoes especially for that. I had a hospital. We started to build the equipment, a school to teach the children not to enter into civilization and use drugs like cocaine and heroin and amphetamines like slimming tablets, and not to use too much white sugar, because white sugar will destroy you eventually, and definitely not to drink alcohol, but to continue with their own culture of using their own herbs. And as you know what the herbs they are, don't you? They're classed as an a drug in our civilization because they don't want them to be legalized. They'd rather sell whiskey to the children and wine. And everyday BBC and all the other stations are advertising, drink my wine, drink my whiskey. And it's the people like that that will not allow the legalization of ayahuasca, which is a mind-opening vine. And even the babies of 1 year and less, the mothers of the Amazon people give them, which is a vine crushed and boiled and fermented. And while all this is being done, there's a special drum beat, and it's to receive the spirits of the nature. And so children, babies, are given it so that they will not take any of the baggage into the mind. The baggage of the mind is the civilization, the wrong teachings of the Bible and capitalism, and we must produce, and we must go to school, and we must be constructive, and that is all rubbish. That is what's causing global warming. I mean, if the people took ayahuasca, they would relax and listen to the spirits talking to them and learn that life is not making money and having material objects. Life is communicating with nature, because nature is what we are. And we hide the nature within us by using these clothes, wrappings.
Yeah.
But I like to be talking in Australia because there's still a lot of natural people in Australia that retain their own culture and their own language and their own, their own way of being. And I'd like to appeal to those people as well. Okay? Thanks. Bye.
See ya.
Bye-bye.